Hello, Marisa, we can't hear you. Okay, we're still trying to get Marisa's audio, but we will get started nevertheless. And like I was saying, we just wanted to welcome you for joining the webinar, which is focusing on using the SWA Collaborative Behaviours country profiles, which were recently circulated to countries. We have 37 country profiles, which covers more than half of the SWA partnership. And the discussion today is mainly to go back and a bit and just talk about where the SWA collaborative behaviors come from, where they originate from, and we will just highlight what these behaviors are, but we will not talk a lot about the details for each of the behaviors, because this has been presented in different platforms before. We will then talk about the methodology and then get into suggestions of how the behaviors can be used to further strengthen country processes and to strengthen systems at country level. So for this, at this time, I would just check that Marisa's audio is okay. Marisa, can you hear me now? Okay, looks like we're still having problems. So we also have on the call Amanda Robertson, who's the co-chair, who's one of the co-chairs for the Country Processes Working Group. The other co-chair is Dr. Kefa Ombacho, who has not yet joined, but he will join. As I understand, he's possibly in another meeting at the moment. But his colleague Benjamin from Kenya is also on the call. Dr. Ombacho is the co-chair of the CPWG, which was also very instrumental in working around the collaborative behaviors. So Amanda, I'll pass it on to you, and then we'll get on with the program. And hopefully by then, Marisa will be back as well.
Thank you so much, Satali, and thank you to everyone for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and move us to the first main slide. And one thing that we wanted to talk about before we get too much into the profiles is really what is going to be required of us in terms of the preparedness for the Sustainable Development Goals. And specifically, the SDGs require a comprehensive approach to both achieve and maintain our progress that goes beyond what we put in place for the Millennium Development Goals. The why, or the objective of our work, is to achieve universal access, to reduce inequalities, and to improve sustainability. In order to do this, we need a well-functioning sector with appropriate building blocks in place. And we will achieve our objectives by identifying ways of working that put countries at the center and in the lead of making these lasting changes. Now, a variety of tools have either been developed or in the process of being developed to achieve this shared objective. These tools will allow for the comprehensive approach that we've talked about in order to tackle the Sustainable Development Goals. And I want to talk a little bit about what some of those tools are right now. For instance, we have the Sustainable Development Goal indicators, we have new service ladders, and we have updated baseline data that assists us in tracking the progress towards the SDGs. The sector diagnostic tools like the WASH bottleneck assessment tool, the GLASS survey, the country status overviews, and the monitoring country progress in drinking water and sanitation, or the MAPAS, allow us to identify and address gaps in overall sector efficacy. And finally, the collaborative behavior country profiles that we'll talk about in more detail today reflect how effectively we're working together and areas where we can improve upon our shared efforts to deliver and sustain services to all. So how we work together matters. In the WASH sector, this is often a neglected or overlooked area. And we're not just talking about coordination within country governments. As the quote on this slide says, This is really about full and responsible participation of all stakeholders. And while it's not listed on the slide, this very much includes development partners as well, including non-governmental organizations, bilateral donors, multilateral development banks, etc. To achieve the SDGs, it will be critical for all of the partners to adopt ways of working that support the improvement of long-term sector performance and sustainability. The SWA collaborative behaviors are the ways of working through which the building blocks can be put in place, and which, if jointly adopted by both governments and development partners, will strengthen country capacity to deliver and sustain services to all. The collaborative behaviors emerged out of extensive research and out of country experiences during the implementation of the Paris, Accra, and Busan Aid and Development Effectiveness Initiatives. Considerable lessons were also obtained from other sectors, including education, nutrition, health, and agriculture. While these aren't the only conditions for achieving the SDGs, evidence does point to an increased potential for catalyzing action for sustained and universal service delivery if the collaborative behaviors are adopted. And I know there's a lot on this slide, but we wanted to be able to provide just a snapshot of what this looks like. And partners are encouraged to use existing country processes such as your joint sector reviews to diagnose sector performance and agree upon actions to improve progress. But to support these processes that are already in place, SWA partners such as UNICEF have included the building blocks in their WASH bottleneck analysis tool, or the WASH BAT, which helps to identify performance challenges and develop response strategies. The UN Global Analysis and Assessment of Sanitation and Drinking Water, or the GLASS, covers different aspects of the building blocks in its monitoring of the WASH enabling environment. SWA members from two working groups, the Global Monitoring Harmonization Working Group and the Country Processes Working Group, are working together to finalize indicators to monitor the collaborative behaviors. For each behavior, there is an indicator for governments and an indicator for development partners. These indicators are not comprehensive, but they do aim to capture the core elements of each behavior. The data acquired will come from existing monitoring initiatives such as GLASS, OECD, and World Bank assessments. And this will reduce the burden on countries and development partners to have to provide additional reports and data. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Satali.
Thank you so much, Amanda. We appreciate that. And just to also reiterate that this work so far has been work that has been done by a lot of partners in terms of thinking through the behaviors themselves, that research that was done by a lot of partners, but also this being broadly agreed within the SWA partnership, leading then to the creation of the indicators, where there was joint work between the global monitoring Global Monitoring and Harmonization Working Group and the Country Processes Working Group. Now, we are lucky to have Betsy and Fiona. Both of them work with the WHO GLASS team that Amanda referred to, and they worked a lot also on the methodology for monitoring and for the creation of the country profiles, which were sent to countries a few weeks ago. So I will now pass on the next few slides to Betsy, who will talk through these the slides on the methodology, and then we will have a Q&A. Meanwhile, as Betsy is presenting, please do type in the chat area your name and where you're joining us from. If you're also joining with other colleagues with you, please include their names as well. Thank you very much. Betsy, over to you. You can take over as presenter.
Great. Thanks, Satali, and thanks, Amanda, for laying the groundwork for what I'm going to talk about, which is the methodology for preparing the collaborative behavior country profiles, and also thanks to all of the audience members for participating in this webinar. So, as Amanda mentioned, the SWA had identified 4 collaborative behaviors, but then for how to go about that, how are we going to monitor them? And so this was a new area for the WASH sector, so we needed to develop indicators and determine how best to share the information. And as Satali and Amanda mentioned, this was a coordinated effort of partners in the Country Processes Working Group and the Global Monitoring Harmonization Working Group. But during the indicator development process, we also received feedback and input from partners outside of those working groups as well. It was very much an inclusive and collaborative process. And so the process was quite long. It lasted over 24 months, and it was iterative. We would come up with draft indicators and present them, and then receive feedback from the partners, and then come up with another version of them. And so the first profiles were presented at the ministers' meeting in Ethiopia in 2016, and we presented 5 sample country profiles as a proof of concept. Those profiles were well received, and we received feedback after the sector's ministers meeting that we then incorporated with a small group of partners, mostly from the CPWG, including UNICEF, WaterAid, the World Bank, WHO, members of civil society organizations. And so we finalized those indicators. And then before the 2017 high-level meeting, we produced a number of country profiles that was used as part of the preparatory process for the high-level meeting. And then we again received feedback on the profiles after the June 2017 steering committee meeting. And so after that meeting, we finalized what the profiles would look like and finalized all of the methodology for producing them. And we have now completed profiles for 37 countries that are now all available online, and also the SWA Secretariat has circulated them around to country partners. And so since we'd never done this before in the WASH sector, we had a few key principles driving the indicator development. First of all, we wanted to focus on the core elements of each behavior. And so I'm sure if you've all seen the behaviors, there's a lot to unpack in each of them, but we wanted to focus on a key number of indicators. So what was the most important part on the indicator, and we drilled down into that. And then, as Amanda mentioned, there are still other tools such as GLASS and the WASHBAT that continue to monitor and analyze elements of the enabling environment that are not covered in these indicators. So these profiles are not comprehensive of the entire enabling environment, but really highlight the core elements of each of the collaborative behaviors. The second one was that we wanted to push the WASH sector to attempt to measure aspects not measured before. Measuring behavior change is a very difficult thing to do, but we wanted to give it a try, and we wanted to try for the best as possible. So we weren't limited by, oh, this was going to be hard to do. We really tried to give it our all and push the WASH sector to measure things that had not been measured before. Finally, we wanted to leverage existing monitoring initiatives and adapt them accordingly in the future. We did not want to have the monitoring process for the collaborative behavior indicators be an additional reporting burden on countries, and so we really did leverage existing data sources. Much of the data from the profiles is from GLASS, as well as World Bank assessments and OECD. And then finally, I think this is a really key element for each behavior. There's an indicator for governments and development partners. Because the behaviors apply to everyone working in the sector, we really wanted to highlight what country governments and development partners were doing side by side. And so you'll notice in the profile, there is a column for governments and a column for development partners. And then this also draws on the success of the IHP Plus indicators, which is in the health sector, and they do something similar. And so they have had great success highlighting both development partners and country governments side by side. And then finally, these are the profiles that were produced for the first round. And as Satali mentioned, they are all available online and as well as been sent out to the countries. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions later, and now I'm going to turn it back over to Satali.
Thank you so much, Betsy. And that slide that you have, just to explain the countries that are highlighted, those are the countries which are from the Africa region that we anticipate to be on this webinar. If you look through the list and you can't see your country, we would still be happy to talk about what you can do to actually have a dialogue on the indicators for the collaborative behaviors, and I think that's also an area where we can have more conversation on what you can do. At this point, we're happy to open for questions, basically to hear if there are any questions on what Amanda presented, as well as what Betsy shared with us. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat. If you want to pick up the floor to speak using the audio, please by all means do so. Some of you might be muted, so if you could just indicate in the chat if you have a question, please let us know, and then we will unmute your line in case you're muted. So I'll just pause to check if there are any questions. Is there any questions so far? I see Fiona is typing. Fiona, I can actually unmute your line and then you can speak. Fiona, do you want to try? Okay, looks like it's not, your audio is not working, so maybe, sorry, you just have to keep on typing, sorry about that. Is there anybody else who might have a question as well while Fiona is typing? Okay, audio is not working for Fiona. Okay, so I think the point Fiona is making us also is that we can share the numbers for people to call in. We will do that. So I will then take us through the next set of slides, which are now, okay, I see a few more people typing, so I'll just pause and see if we have questions. Marisa, could you just post the numbers for people to call in? Great, thank you. So I'll just wait for Ogochukwu. If you wanted to speak, I have opened your line, so you can. Yes, please.
Hello, thank you. I'm Ngami Somhlanga, calling from Swaziland.
Good.
I think it's my first time to be part of this, and I'm excited to see the collaborative behaviors, the profile for Swaziland. I can note that when you go through the profile, the kind of behavior. First of all, it's about enhanced governance. It's about strengthened use of country systems. I can note that there is quite a lot of gaps in terms of data not available. I just want to understand, how can we improve that? Because as you go through this, you can note that there are some areas probably data was not provided or information was not given when the behaviors were formulated. Can we still be in a position to update the position of the country behaviors? Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think I will ask Betsy to talk to that part about the missing data now. And then I think we can also talk about the next steps on the second round of these profiles. So Betsy or Fiona, do you want to take up that question?
Yeah, I can jump in. So yeah, that is definitely an issue with the current round of the profiles, is missing data. And I think this was the first time, as I had mentioned, that we had really tried to collect this type of data. And one of the challenges that we faced was, in the past, GLASS has collected data on external support agencies and how they work globally, but it was a challenge to collect information on how external support agencies worked in specific countries, especially across all of the SWA partners. And so we gave a first attempt in the ESA, the External Support Agency Survey, last year, but I think that is something, as the collaborative behavior profiles continue and the indicators continue to evolve and improve is something to look into. And that leads me to the next point of the 2017 profiles, which we just finished. I would say that those are done, but there will be another round coming up, and so then that will reflect hopefully more data availability. And I think also just if things change in the country, I think one of the most important things of the profiles is that they are a tool to spark discussion. And so if you are in a room with development partners and the development partners see that they don't have data available, but they have data that could be applicable, then that could start a discussion. And then I think within countries, you could also kind of adapt where the different development partners and where the government stands within the country. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So I think that we will now move on to the next part of the...
Fiona would like to add something to Tali.
Oh, all right, sure. Fiona, please. Fiona? Okay, so let's see. Fiona, have you joined via phone now? Okay, so Fiona is still trying to join. Fiona, do you mind? We can come back to your input after I share my few slides. They're not long. All right, great. So just go ahead and then we'll bring Fiona's input into that conversation. Amanda, as well, you might. The point that I want to make is something that also relates to the country processes working group, which is one of the working groups in SWA, and this group is having conversations on the process for the next profiles. We're also looking into what lessons we can gather from the countries that have received profiles this time around, so that we could help to better support the next process. But as Bessie has said, so far, because this was the first time they're being done, there are data gaps here and there, and hopefully with the next process, maybe most of those data gaps would be closed. I wanted to share these are just suggestions coming from the Secretariat on on how we think that these profiles can be used. And we're sharing these suggestions, not that this is all that can be done, but just as material that you could use to spark a conversation, as Betsy had said. I think that the key thing to consider is that in the SWA strategy, SWA partners are committed to implementing the SWA behaviors. So that's the first starting point. I think that starting point gives SWA partners the peer support mechanism to call on each other where these behaviors are not being implemented, to actually begin to implement them, or to develop a path or a plan on how they can progressively achieve a better, a more desirable level of ways of working. So I just wanted to reiterate that these are indeed embedded in the SWA strategy agreed upon by SWA partners, and that SWA partners will implement the behaviors across all aspects of their work, and that they will use existing systems to assess progress in changing behaviors and report on progress as well. Now, we think that there are a number of things that you could do with the profile that you have received, and we think that the first key thing to identify or to realize is that these behaviors provide a common language within the country for having a dialogue, for having discussion, and for aligning sector actions. The behaviors can also be used as a tool for strengthening sector visioning. So at the point that the country is developing the sector vision and target, the country could also say that in terms of ways of working, in terms of enhancing government leadership, or in terms of using country systems, we want to move move to a better level, and that level looks like this. The country could it could create its own focus or targets that they want to achieve, perhaps in terms of increasing the number of actors that are using country systems, for example, or increasing the level of resources that go through country systems. And like I noted, some of these might not be achieved overnight. As we know, behaviors might take a few months or years to achieve, but it is better to have a plan and a modality for progressively achieving those. So we think that these profiles serve as a baseline for a start, and where there are data gaps, I think we could look at how those could be filled. We think that the profiles also can serve as a way to harmonize sector monitoring and also reporting on these particular ways of working, so that when partners come together, they're basically looking at this set of indicators for discussions. We also think that the tool itself, the profile is a tool for communications. It's also a tool for general advocacy, specifically for those actors where you think that they could improve their actors. And as Amanda had said, the profiles cover actions for government, and they cover actions for other partners as well. So this advocacy platform can be joint in terms of what actions need to happen across the board. And we've just tried to tease out further some of these actions in terms of around when there are coordination mechanisms, that the profile can be a basis for in-country dialogues. It can input into sector reviews, such as joint sector reviews. There could be a discussion there looking at how the country is performing on how partners are working together, and what steps they want to take to actually improve on that. We think that the profiles can also help the government to identify what actors are doing and where they could strengthen that. And if the country is working on a strategy, like I said, it could convert some of these broad ambitions on the behaviors into very specific milestones or commitments. So one example that I would like to give is if you go to your profile, maybe one of the indicators is showing that there is no procurement system in place, or that system which is already in place is not being adequately used. The target or ambition would be that the government, working with partners, will develop a procurement system that fits internationally acceptable standards, and that could be done over a course of time, say in 2 years or 3 years or whatever time that is acceptable. And then for each partner, it could be that their milestone or commitment is to transition their support so that they can increasingly begin to use that a procurement system that has been developed by the country. So on one hand, there is the leadership being shown by the government in terms of putting in place that procurement system, but there is also the commitment from partners to progressively use that system. And this is how you could pick one aspect of the behavior and create an ambition around it, and create some very specific actions that can be done through which each partner can see that. So I wanted to pick that as an example, just to show how this could be used. Like I said, it could be used as a major conversation around the JSR. It could be used for communication purposes. It could be used in joint discussions between government and cooperating partners. But you will also see that the effort is to actually go beyond just the external support agencies in terms of donors. So this profile could actually be used across the board to get strong sector dialogue, to create corrective actions, to feed into processes for regular review, and also to create the intermediate steps, which could be the commitments. And on that aspect, the SWA has been discussing the updated accountability mechanism from the previous mechanism, which was mostly centered around the HLM, where countries made commitments at the HLM, reported on them after a year, and now that system has been updated so that SWA partners do in fact use their country processes, such as the joint sector review or any other review mechanism, to agree on what their commitments are, and be able to report through that system, but also feed these processes through the global level. So these profiles could be very instrumental as material for discussion at country level, in sector diagnostics, or rather in identifying what the challenges are in the sector, in identifying and agreeing what the sector objectives or vision is, and in identifying the intermediate steps to achieve within a course of time, maybe 2 or 3 years. So we wanted to also just address one question which we think is really big. What if your country does not have a profile? We think that first of all, get in touch with us, and for this year, because there will not be more profiles that will be created in the next few months until we do the next round. We could work with you on a set of questions that were used before we had these profiles. It's a very simple process. It's obviously not as robust as having the profile, and it's not one that we encourage the most, but it might be the stopgap mechanism. We still think that the best is to have a country dialogue with actors, maybe using a sample from another country, and try and have a discussion on where you think partners, the government and partners, are on the collaborative behaviors, and trying to identify areas where you might want to strengthen action. Obviously, that might not be a data-led conversation, because these profiles emerge out of a lot of data sets, but we think that where there are data gaps and you identify those data gaps, please do see maybe how you could identify that data and use it in further conversations. We also think that we could help in linking you with another country that has done some work on this, or a country that has incorporated or started to use these profiles in a way in their own country process. And some of these countries are using processes that started even before the profiles were prepared, but we would be happy to link your country with another country which has been using these profiles. So at this point, I want to make a stop and see if there are any questions. And then Benjamin will offer some insights from Kenya in terms of what they've been doing and how they might use these profiles which were recently prepared and circulated. So if you have any question, please put it in the chat. Otherwise, also feel free to pick up the mic to speak. I will pause at this point just to check if we have any questions.
Shatali, it's Fiona. I can speak now.
Oh, great, Fiona. We can hear you very, very well. Please go ahead.
Loud and clear. Yeah, you can hear me also loud and clear through the chat box, right? Thanks very much for that. What I'd like to maybe just add to what Betsy shared, and also this, I think, will hopefully help address Lotte's question, and also complementing what you've just said. So just to re-emphasize the fact that these profiles have been compiled using existing data that's published. One of the data sources, as Betsy mentioned, is the GLASS survey. So regarding the question from our colleague who was coming in, I think from Swaziland, I'm sorry if I don't have the right country, but the first question that came in, yes, there are still some data missing. Cycle, the first attempt was made to produce these profiles using GLASS as one of the data sources, but also OECD, some of the World Bank data, and the PEFA data. I think one of the key issues is not how to input directly into the profiles, but it's more about making sure that we're using these existing mechanisms that are ongoing to make sure countries are participating. And I take this opportunity to mention that the new GLASS cycle will be initiated by mid-year. So we're going to start with July. Now, if a country has not participated in GLASS, it will be extremely difficult to be able to use that as a data source to compile a country profile for the collaborative behaviours. So it is just an encouragement for countries to participate as SWA partners to the next GLASS cycle, second cycle of the SWA collaborative behaviour profiles. So just to come back to the main point, we're not going to be revising the current profiles, but this is having the exact reaction that we want. Is actually a reaction of, oh, there's data gaps, how can we fill those, and what are the mechanisms to fill those? And one of them is to make sure that countries are participating, submitting data to OECD, are submitting and being part of the GLAS platforms and that are facilitated by partners. And I encourage any partner to come forward, as been the case recently with some of our partners at IRC and WaterAid and SWA to help facilitate this new GLAS cycle. So that's what I wanted to ask, and I hope, Lotte, that has helped answer your question, and also to help answer any questions for those of you wondering, if you don't have a profile, how can they happen? Well, one of the first steps is actually participating in the next GLAS survey. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Fiona. Let me just check if there are any questions. I will just move the presentation to a few slides back so that I can show Dedo the list of countries that we have now. So Dedo, what you're seeing on the screen is the list of countries for which we have collaborative behavior profiles. And we can also talk for those countries that do not have profiles that operate within your region. And for West Africa, you can see we have some Francophone countries and Nigeria for the Anglophone countries. Thank you. Fiona, thank you so much for providing that additional information, in terms of the missing data gaps, and that this is indeed the kind of conversation we should be having, and also on the fact that say in the course of this year we should not be expecting an updated profile, but that this should trigger the conversation at country level. So are there any more questions? If there are any questions, please put them in the chat, or feel free to take the mic. I'm just going through to check if there are any more questions. Ogochukwu, thank you so much for that input. If you want to speak to what you're planning to do in Nigeria, please let us know. And I know that you're sitting